thank you for being here. And welcome to the Vermont Center for Photography. If those of you who have not been here before, a lot of new faces. I assume steadfast followers of our good friend Mark here. So thank you for making the drive out. I'm Josh Farr, director here at the Vermont Center for Photography. Just a quick plug. So we have gallery spaces, we have studio spaces, including darkroom and digital lab and lighting studio spaces, as well as a thrift store of vintage photography goods that you may have seen at the entrance. So we try to do all different types of things, photographic and including events like tonight, I should say classes as well. And then for the exhibits, we try to get the artists to come in and talk a little bit about themselves and how they came to end up where they did and how they produce the work that you see on the walls in front of you. So I actually sort of serendipitously bumped into Mark. I think I was hanging a show at APE Gallery in Northampton 5-6 years ago, I don't know. And you were coming in to spec things out, to scope out a show that you were hanging following that of your Cuba series work, I believe it was. And then I was in touch with you then, and then I saw your show at Deerfield Academy. It's like, this guy is on some next level stuff. So we need to get him in, and it was scheduled for 2020, and then something about a pandemic happened, and 2 years later of rescheduling and pushing, it finally came to be able to hang his work in the main space, which we're thrilled to have. And it was such a refreshing change for myself to have such a different scale and sort of texture of work on the walls than your traditionally formatted and framed pieces. So we were very lucky and fortunate to have him. So I'll let him introduce himself. He probably knows himself better than I do, more or less. But again, thank you. And we're going to chat for 45 minutes or so. There's no hard, fast rules. And then certainly open it up to questions at any time. And please help me welcome and thank Mark Guglielmo.
Thank you, Josh. It's a joy to be here. It's an honor. Thank you for coming, all of you. Just to have space to talk about art, talk about image making is a real gift. I see a lot of image makers here, artists, videographers, painters, illustrators, musicians, media makers, theater directors. We all, on some level, are image makers. And this work is about me exploring image making for the past 40 years. I'm gonna start here in Queens, New York. This is a picture of my family at my grandmother's house in Flushing, Queens. And like this group here, my family has a lot of image makers. And my grandmother is right in the middle there. Let's see if I can get a little light on her. Yeah, she's right there in the center. And she raised 11 children and was also an image maker. She was a painter and ended up going to get her associate's degree. She dropped out of school when she was 13 when her mother died, and ended up in her 50s and 60s exploring painting. So when I was growing up, I would see her brushes at the house. I would see her paintings. She had art books all around on the living room coffee table. So even as a young child, I was looking at art. I was looking at pictures. My father took us to the Met Museum a lot as children. It was free, and we'd spend hours there, especially in the winter. And so looking at images, looking at paintings, not so much looking at photography, but looking at images, paintings. A bunch of my uncles are photographers, not professional, but they bought cameras at some point in their lives, and they have good eyes. My uncle Angelo here is a filmmaker. My uncle Mike is a drummer. My uncle Pete makes sculptures out of wood. So creativity was something we had in the family. It was nothing anyone thought they could make a living off of or even make a life out of. So that's been something that I've had to birth myself. But I wanted to start here. There's me in the middle, right there. That's how I felt about going to my grandma's house. And so here is the beginning of my image making. I was 12, 13 years old. I had a paper route. And so I had money. As a 12-year-old, I was making, I can't even remember how much, but we used to go to this delicatessen where the person who ran the paper routes would give us every 2 weeks our money. And I had money to buy some things that I might want. We didn't get allowance or anything, not for raking the leaves or anything, but I had some money. So I bought an Instamatic camera similar to this. Kodak made these, a bunch of companies made these. They took 110 film. Some of you probably had cameras like that. And even in this picture, which was probably in the first couple months of owning that camera, you know, me and Tommy have to rake the leaves in the yard. And we're doing the job, but I'm taking a break to get some photography in. And there was something about image making for me as a child that felt empowering. It felt like, you know, as children, we're basically subject to the choices of our parents. You go to this school, you wake up at this time, these are the clothes you're gonna wear, this is what we're eating tonight. You know, you don't have much agency as a child. And so for me, the camera was one of the first ways that I felt like I could influence and create my reality. And it felt very powerful and magical to take pictures and then drop them off at the developing place, go back, get them and see how are they? How is the composition? I just remember as a little kid looking at my photographs and saying, well, how's the composition? Like you can even see in this photograph, I put my shadow in there, so it's sort of a self-portrait. You know, I got my brother in there. It's not a pose shot. He's kind of probably wiping leaves off of his sweater to get it off. And he's like, get down here and help me and forget about that camera, you know? But I'm already thinking about composition, about how to make an image that appeals to my eye. And here's 2 years later, where all of a sudden I've taken this big leap from the Kodak Instamatic to my father must have realized, okay, Mark, he's serious about these photographs. So he bought Tommy and I a Konica 35 millimeter camera to share. Tommy wasn't interested in it, so I realized I was getting the camera. And I had to pick an elective in 10th grade, and I did not know what to pick. It was gonna have to be something like cooking or sewing or photography. And so I was like, well, I'll just take that. And I had never had a class with this woman before, Natalie Schifano, and she was incredible. She totally changed my life. She was one of these teachers who herself had this passion for photography. And she had put, I believe it was her, but there was a dark room about the size of this dark room. And before you leave, I suggest you go to the end of this hallway and turn to your right and you'll see the dark room. The dark room is this room unlike any other room in the world. It's all black walls, and the lights, when you turn them on to make, they're like purplish because you don't want to influence the images that you're making with, you know, regular lights. And she basically taught us how to not just take pictures and make pictures, but how to develop the negatives and then how to take those negatives into the dark room and do the whole process of working with chemicals and taking test strips and figuring out how long to expose the images. And I just remember, and I know anyone who's practiced darkroom photography, that the first times when you put that image into the developer and you see it come out of the invisible world into an image, and then you have to react in order to stop it where you want it by putting it in the stop. You know, you got 3 bins of liquids. Seeing it come out of, in this dark room, seeing this image appear out of nothingness that you made was so empowering to me. This is an image, a portrait of my brother and sister, again, in the yard. And you can see that I'm already you know, there's depth of field here that I'm working, the out of focus in the background, and just trying to get some truth on films, trying to get emotion, trying to go beyond the surface in a photograph. One day I was in the mat room of the high school across the hall from where we did most of our classes. There was a mat room where you would cut the mats for your photographs and put them on the backing. And I believe there was a magazine or a book that was about, it was probably like an art forum magazine, something about current art world. And I saw this image in the book. It must have been like 3 inches by 2 inches. But when I saw it, my eyes just were like zoom right onto it. And something about that image, I recognized, what is that? I've never seen anything like that. And it was one of those moments, I was probably about 15 or 16. And I remember thinking to myself, I have to make images like that. I have to try that at some point. It would be many years before I would do it on that scale, because this piece, as you can see, is 9 feet wide by 6 feet tall. Hockney is an English artist who was a painter first, and then he got into photography by taking Polaroids of images he wanted to paint. So he was using photography to assist him in painting. And I wanted to share this image by Robert Rauschenberg, who is a mixed media artist who almost 20 years before that image by David Hockney is, you see this, him working the photography to break up an image using different photographs, where you have 6 images that are creating this portrait or this skeleton that gives you a different feeling than single image, single point perspective. And that's one of the things that I realized afterwards drew me to Hockney. I also show this to just make a reference to the fact that while I draw on Hockney and really stole his idea, because in art, you don't borrow, you steal. Because if you don't steal, you don't own it. And you have to own it to make it your own and then say something original, say something that is out of your voice, even though it's his idea that developed that. And Rauschenberg is interesting. He had a saying of, ideas are not real estate. So that's what artists do. We look for influences, we look for what moves us the most, and we try to make it our own. And we try to make something that feels authentic to our own truth. And this is one of my earliest attempts at a multi-image collage, so to speak. This is 12 4x6s, Tommy again up in Idaho, where we would go in the summer. And even this simple image for me personally was much more alive than a simple still image. There's something about perspective that changes when you're taking multiple pictures and putting them together that even with this simple attempt really made me happy. And that's a theme that I will come back to, is this multi-point perspective as opposed to single point perspective. Photography was something that always took a back seat to hip hop for me. I was in music. That was my first love, really. And I always kind of, in the first 25 years of my adult life, focused on that. But even so, photography remained something that was important for me to express myself in different ways. So here I am about 25, 26 years old, and I'm living in Los Angeles now. I have I'm still shooting with the Konica and still working with black and white photography, still exploring how can you make an image that has motion, that has life, that has power, that somehow is an expression of how I'm feeling and feels real, feels alive. So this image is to kind of explain that my photography is very much influenced by my hip hop background. And hip hop as a culture is very much a repurposing bricolage kind of an art form, where we do use music from the past that we cut up, splice up, dice up, and turn it into this new thing. And my photography was very much informed by also the do-it-yourself aspect of hip hop, where you don't wait for someone else to let you do something. You don't wait to go to school to get a degree to make music. You just do it. You go and you get a microphone, you get your recording equipment, you figure out how to do it, and you do that on your own. And you are influenced by what's going on in the world, but you don't let a lack of training or a lack of formal training prevent you from doing what you want to do. This is Jabari and I, my partner in rhyme. So here, you know, here's a picture of, I was a substitute teacher for probably 3 or 4 years, in total 5 or 6 years, but in LA for 2 or 3 years. And even in my classroom, I'm bringing in the camera and I'm taking pictures of the kids. Now, obviously that's something probably you couldn't do now, but I really, one morning I remember saying to them, all right, look, we're gonna take a portrait of you guys. And I want you to just be yourselves. This isn't, you know, pose for the teacher day. This is, I want to see the real you. And I got a bunch of them to stand up on the back, you know, counter where we did our experiments, and a bunch of them in the front. And you could just see how honest they are. I mean, how many students are going to give their teacher the 2 middle fingers on the bottom left row there? You see him giving me the double middle fingers? And that's about him feeling safe enough to do that. You know, I wasn't offended. He wasn't doing it to me. And so here you see me still trying to explore this idea while I'm teaching, performing, working in restaurants. Now by 2001, I moved back to New York and still haven't dived into making a large scale collage. Still something I know I need to do, but like all of us, one of those things I hadn't done yet. And New York was very hard for me because it's where I'm from, but living there, as I was 30 at the time when I moved there, I got there 2 weeks before 9/11, and I was working at a restaurant, which completely dried up. There was no one coming to the restaurant. So money-wise, it was very difficult. Just getting groceries in New York was challenging. And this image is really a metaphor for me of that time where file sharing was rampant. I was sort of well-trained and ready for the music business, but the music business was disappearing. There was no budgets anymore to make records. I worked on a few records that got well paid, but there was months and months and months where there was no money coming in. So I was working in restaurants again because it was like $75 to work at a school for the day. And I said, hell no, I'm not doing that. But this was where I really said to myself, it was in 2005, 2006, where I was like, you're well into your 30s, you're almost 40s, and you still haven't tried the photo collages. And so I bought a used Nikon and a kit. It had a couple telephoto lenses, it had a couple macro lenses, and finally I got up the courage, and one day I bought a whole bunch of film, and I loaded up the camera, and I walked to Prospect Park. And it's not working to change the thing. No, it's not working.
Technology. Technology. Hi, I'm Mark. It doesn't like anything.
There it is. It worked. So the buttons are working now?
I don't know.
Use the buttons.
I just clicked the trackpad on the screen and it went back up.
Okay, great.
I have no idea what I did.
All right. So finally I get up the courage and I go into Prospect Park and I find this elm tree, which is like my favorite tree in the whole park. And I used to sit under the tree and just relax outside the city. I think you got to press that to mute it, no? Yeah, okay. Thank you, though. So, because I'd never done this before, I ended up lying on the roots of the tree and taking pictures up at the crown of the tree, at the branches, and then all the way down to the vista on the horizon. I did step back from the tree and take a few looking at it, but only a few. So I'm using the telephoto lens and I'm getting up close. So every image is with the telephoto. And when I got back to my studio, my house, my apartment, I got the photos developed at a lab, and then I started laying them out. And I quickly learned I cannot make a tree like this, not like a tree that you would see in the park. And so I got doubles made, which was interesting. So I had 2 of every image. There was about 3 or 4 rolls, so you're looking at maybe 200 images. And at some point, I ended up building the same collage on both sides. So you see this side and this side are similar, you know, because of the doubles. And then at some point I was like, well, what if I just put them together and try to get them to meet in the middle? And I had this big knot on the tree that I had photographed. And I was like, well, it could be like an eye. And so I was like, at a certain point, I was like, well, let me just have it floating and I can fill up the rest with sky. And I end up adding some flowers because this was a frigid cold day. You can't really tell that, but here this is really one of my, and this took about 2 years to make. I completed some of the original and then I didn't know what to do. So I put it away. I worked on some other collages. And so here is the birth of my trying to make these large scale collages. In 2015, I visited Cuba, and I had an exhibit in 2013, which was my first real exhibit at a gallery of these collages. But when I went to Cuba, I had no intention of making art. But the way I was received there and the way the people treated me with such warmth and kindness, this was a collage I made of a family that I became very close with. And it was the first time since my grandmother had died in 2009 that I felt as if I was in her house again. And this piece was taken on a cell phone, 2 different days. And you'll see the guy with the striped shirt who's singing in the middle is this same guy here. This is Hector. And this is his father. And this is his mother. And this is her mom's house. And this is Hector Sr.'s brother here. And I think he's an uncle as well. And this is Hector Sr.'s partner. And this is 2 friends of mine that were on a salsa trip with me. And so Cuba basically gives me my first motif, my first theme that is so inspiring for me that I go to town. And within 18 months, I made 18 murals. This one is 12 feet wide. And it really gives me a chance. It's colorful down there. The sun is bright. The light is wonderful. People are warm. All of these pieces have interviews connected to them. So it's not just like you're taking images, but you're actually letting them speak and they're telling you about their lives and their perspectives. And so Cuba gives me the chance to really go all the way with this medium. You know, this piece is over 12 feet long. Well, no, it's 2 inches under 12 feet wide. And here you have me, you know, putting levels into this piece. You know, this was taken in the atrium of a school. So you have the sky here, and you know she's you know mopping the floor, but she's above these children. You know, I didn't want to make this image really wide. I wanted to pack it all into one rectangle. And so Cuba gives me the permission and the inspiration to really explore, which leads to painting. I started painting in 2014. And as far as an image making is concerned, it's completely different in many ways. It has some correlations, but in painting, you don't have anything to start with but paint, a brush, and your own inspiration. With photography, I take some pictures, I get them developed, I lay them out, I got an image coming already. With this, you have to make the image, and you have to start to become very aware of value, of tone, you know, color, hue, value, chroma, you know, the intensity of the color, the value of the paint, and the hue, the color. And so I'm exploring this And it's informing my photo collages because I'm bouncing back and forth in the studio, back and forth. This I wanted to share because it's the only image that you'll see today that is not lens-based. I didn't take a photograph of myself to paint this. This is me looking in the mirror. And so the lens, which is how photographs are made, is not a part of this image. And so it's a triptych, and this is informed a lot by Francis Bacon, who was a painter from England, who had this philosophy that with the advent of photography in 1839, painters needed to not do what photographs do anymore. Painters were no longer there to show you what reality looks like, but had to tell you other things. And so he advocated for a raw approach to painting, to use paint to evoke emotion that has nothing to do with physiology. And so you see me exploring that here, which influences my trip to Sicily. And so in 2019, in the fall, going to Cuba really kind of made me realize I need to go back to my homeland. I need to go back to my ancestral homeland. And so I went for 3 weeks and I met my sister, Jennifer, here, and my brother-in-law, Andrew, and we did a bit of a tour. And, Sicily is, sea and sky and beautiful nature and food and wine and people. And here's gelato. This is a Baroque church. So the art there, I saw a Caravaggio painting for the first time in person in Siracusa. And I met this artist, Andrea Chisesi, and that's him and his wife, Marcella. And they have a gallery in Siracusa. And this is Gabriele Ciancimino, another celebrated artist, Sicilian, who's close with my sister and I. And what was fortuitous about this trip was I had gotten an Airbnb in Siracusa. This was before my sister and Andrew arrived. And I was walking, just exploring the neighborhood right by my Airbnb. And I walked by this gallery and I saw this image in the window and it just grabbed me. And I said to myself, there's something about that image that I need to look at. And it was Andrea's work. And Andrea basically is a photographer. He started as a photographer in Milano. He was in the fashion world. And he makes these collages where he takes images from the street, from signs on the walls in southern Italy, and he pulls them off of the walls, the old ones that are kind of pasted over. And then he glues them to canvases, and then he prints over them, like getting a photograph printed. He sends the canvas to a developing place where they print large-scale photos he takes of classical sculpture onto the collage that he makes. And so for me, it was really a metaphor where he's talking about antiquity, classical sculpture, classical art forms, and then superimposing that on today, images from today, collage, and having this conversation about kind of cross-generational, even cross-cultural, because some of these are not just Roman sculptures, but Greek sculptures, Egyptian sculptures. And so that really had an impact on me. We became friends. I emailed him. I actually emailed his gallery, and they invited me over that night. We ended up hanging out 3 or 4 times, talked a lot of art, and became close. And the other artist that had an impact on me in terms of what I was thinking about for this series is Whitfield Lovell, I saw him speak at Smith College a couple of years before this. And he also has a conversation about images, about history and today. He takes old pictures of African Americans and he paints them, he uses charcoal to draw them over wood, found objects. So he is scavenging for old doors, old siding, and he combines them with other things that he scavenges and goes to garage sales and And so I loved how the background is coming through the portrait and that it's informing the figure, just like Andrea Chisesi. And that was something that really excited me, something I wanted to explore. And so by the time I get to Sicily, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I had no idea. And this is where I met a big roadblock in this project for the first time. In Cuba, the people were so friendly that I was able to do portraits. I was able to picture them in their world. In Sicily, people are not like Cubans. They're not gonna come up to you on the street. Oh, how are you? Where are you from? Really, you're from New York? Oh, my cousin lives in New York. Do you wanna go get a drink or something? Like, that's, Cubans are very friendly. Sicily, they're more like, who are you? I don't know you. You know, I don't know you, and you're kind of looking at me funny. There's a different history in Sicily. They've been ruled by almost a dozen different peoples who've come to the island and taken over and set up shop and changed things dramatically. That in addition to, I mean, I'm not a historian, but when I landed there, I knew immediately I'm not going to have this very social experience in Sicily. It's going to be a more solitary experience, and the art is not going to be portraits. And if it is, I'm going to have to figure something out. And that's where I came to realizing I can do this other thing. I can work with archival photographs, and I can superimpose them over images. So then I was thinking to myself, don't look to take portraits, look to take images that are about that place, that are about Sicily, you know. So when you see the pieces in this exhibit, it's about place, and then the people are superimposed. And so here I wanted to kind of outline my process. So number one, you have me. We were taking a hike, and I stood on this little bluff, and I looked out at this expanse, and the wind was blowing over the ocean, up over the cliffs, and the gulls were riding the waves and then coming up off of the cliff. And the sun was warm and the sky was big and clouds were intense. It was like an operatic scene. So I said to myself, okay, it's always intuitive for me. I'll get an intuitive notion. You gotta photograph this. I'm never out looking for something. I'm just experiencing life. And when life says, yo, take out your camera. So I go to the edge and I look, and you can see down, you know, it's a drop off. And I wanted to show you this image. My sister, I didn't even know she took this, but she took this because she saw me doing a piece, and she's like, okay, I hear he's doing a piece, boom. But here you have single point perspective, okay? A camera is one eye. So we all know that when you cover one eye, you're severely impaired in terms of your viewing ability. You don't see depth. You don't see movement the same. We all know that someone can take a photograph of us and we're like, that doesn't look anything like me. Or that doesn't look anything like that person who I know very well, because when I see them in person, you have the two eyes and you have a brain, so you're processing all these things. So for me, it's about multi-point perspective. And so the difference between that last image and this image is the fact that each little square is a 4x6 where I aimed the camera and took a photograph, and it gives you, for me, it gives me an image that is much more alive to me, is much more dynamic, is much more how I experience things when I see them than how I experience things when I see them through a camera. And this is why I don't do still photography anymore. It became boring to me. It was no longer interesting to me. There are many spectacular photographers, but for me personally, I had to move in this direction because it was more alive to me. And so here you're seeing the doubling of certain things. You're seeing, you know, close up, far away, things not quite matching. So once I have taken the photos, then when I get home, I get them developed by a lab and sit down and kind of organize them. So I kind of know, okay, these are all sky. These are all cactus. These are all this grass. This is all water. This is horizon. And so I have them organized so I can start and grab what I need as I go. I have a nice big table, 8 feet by 4 feet. And I just start with one photograph, usually somewhere in the center. I usually remember when I took the piece, I'll remember, okay, the center of this piece is the door for the portal. So I'm going to start there. I'm going to start in the ocean, in the middle, right on the horizon line, and I'm going to start there and build out, up, down, left, and right. And so here you see me on the left. This is one of my Cuba pieces that was, I think it's about 15 feet long, which originally was 35 feet long. It went from the front of the house all the way back to the back of the house. And then I was like, how can you make, I mean, if it looked good, I would have kept it, but it looked horrible. So I was like, okay, you got to stack this up in a different way. And so I ended up on the floor, moving stuff around. You know, I tape on the top. You can see that the surface of these images has these little pieces of Scotch tape, which is how I fix the composition. And I can pull them out, move them around if I need to. Same here, this piece is kind of growing and I'm working out the composition, moving things as I go. That's step number 3. The step number 4 is once I have the composition the way I like it, I turn the whole thing over, I tape it on the back with this thick archival tape, secure, flip it back over, and then I have to peel off all of these pieces of tape carefully so I don't scratch the emulsion or anything. Now, even once I'm at that stage, it doesn't mean it's done. Because this is an example of the whale, which is in the back of the gallery, and you'll see it's quite a bit smaller now than it was then. I thought that this was going to work, and I was going to actually paint white up here, and maybe a little blue. But I was looking at this, and I was feeling like this image, as an image, is not energized. This could be stronger. How can this be better? And I realized that what I needed to do was cut out this whole center section here. I either cut too wide. Yeah, I cut these 2 out, and I just moved this over. And I cut a little bit off the left. Actually, I think I cut almost this whole thing. So it got a lot thinner, and it ends up becoming this, you know, and you can just see that as an image, even without the painting on top of it, this image compared to that image it's tighter here, it's stronger. And in that last picture, you see me in the studio on the left, I have a painting I'm working on over here, you know, and my palette is here, and the paints are over here. So I'm bouncing back and forth. And so I was still experimenting with how am I going to put the portraits on these collages. And so I was experimenting with freehand painting. Will this work? Will this look good? Will this appeal to me? Will it charge the images? Will it make the collages better than they were, as far as I could tell? And for me, it wasn't working. There was something about the photograph with the freehand painting that was like, they were different worlds and they didn't like each other. Whereas when I took photographs and projected them and used acrylic paint and photo transfers, all of a sudden it's camera. It's about the camera, you know. So there's a camera conversation happening between the projector, between the camera, between the photo collage, and between the photo transfer. And so here's the original reference photo by Letizia Battaglia, who was famous for exposing the mafia in Sicily, where she was from. She would arrive at the crime scene and photograph it so that people knew what was going on. They were not reliant on however the media would spin it, because the media in Sicily was controlled by the same families that were running the mafia. And so she ran a publication for 15 years, and she would arrive at the scene and she would take photographs of everything. So this woman had just found out that she believed her son had been killed. And so this was an image that I wanted to include because it's a reality of what Sicily has been through. And I also wanted to rebut the romantic notion that you see in The Godfather and Goodfellas and things like that, where the pain, the lived pain from the trauma is not visible. It's kind of swept away by, wow, that's a great performance by De Niro, you know. So I really wanted to show the impact on people's lives. I wanted to share this because it's behind the screen, but again, I finished this collage and I looked at it and I said to myself, that doesn't work. And this was very helpful that my painting really helped me with this, because I was able to look at it and say, okay, first of all, there's way too much blue and red. There's no balance here. And my eye was wanting something else. And so I said to myself, I got to do something with this to make this image work. Otherwise, you might as well cut it up and throw it away. And so I ended up realizing, where am I going to put an image if I project it onto here? And so I realized I needed to cover up a lot of the information. I need to introduce some other element. And I introduced yellow. And yellow is a primary color like blue and red. And suddenly I just started to like the image. It started to become charged. The yellow made it work. And I was like, this is my little kid playing, my inner child, just like, yeah, let's have fun with the yellow. Do whatever you want. You know, put little things around the Dixie cups and make her skirt kind of part yellow, and paint this in darkness above the stall, kind of just, you almost don't look at it. And I covered all this up with black paint, acrylic paint. And so to look at the process here's this reference photo from 1997. And so I flipped it around to the other side and I made it fit in. So there's a conversation about how recipes get handed down over the generations, about how what we used to do maybe in the countryside, we also do in the city now. And how he's got a fire with wood, whereas the other guy has like a butane, you know, the evolution of technology, but still we want our ricotta, so we're gonna make it. Now this is the center panel from this large collage here, and I wanted to talk about how I ultimately ended up figuring out the faces. The faces are the most important part of the portraits, and if they're not done right, they won't be interesting. And so this is the reference photo. So first, when I got this reference photo, I was thinking, this will be great. She'll be pointing over the ocean to where all the Italians and Sicilians are gonna go to the US. And when I ended up painting it onto the image, you see she's not pointing towards the ocean, she's pointing towards the land. So I ended up running with it and said, I'll figure that out later. But when I first tried to do a photo transfer onto the photographs, it didn't work. On the left, you can see it's not working. And so what I realized I needed to do was I took acrylic paint and I mixed it to about the color of the sky behind her face. And I painted everywhere where there isn't hair. And I let it dry. And then I did a photo transfer, which is a carbon-based print on print paper, you know, just like the kind of printers we have in offices. And then you put a solution on the back, Citrusolve. It's a lemon-based cleaner. And you scrape the back with a spoon. And it transfers the carbon from the piece of paper to the image, to the photo collage. Now, no sooner was I kind of 7 pieces deep into this series that, you know, George Floyd was killed and we all started taking to the streets, and I just completely had to stop making art. And I took a break for a while, and I realized the Sicily series is not calling me anymore. I need to make something that feels honest about where I'm at right now. And so I ended up making these 2 portraits. One of Breonna Taylor on the left and on the right of George Floyd. This was the same process I used for the Che Guevara collage that was in the Cuba series. And it put me on a journey that kind of departed from Sicily, but that in the last 7, 8 months has returned, where I realized I need to find the truth out about my own people's journey through the US as it relates to race, class, capitalism, empire, all that stuff. And it's led me to this new series that is collage-based and based on reference photos, but it's not, photography is not a part of it other than the reference photos. And I end where I began, which is with my 12-year-old. He was the one, 12-year-old me was the one who was like, art is for me. Camera, yes, let's do that. Let's explore, let's experiment. So what I found so interesting about this picture, other than how happy I am because that was my side of the room and my brother was really messy. He's totally neat now, but he was messy then. And so you could see a line. You could see a line down the middle of the room. It was his side, messy, my side, neat. And on the back here, after I had finally organized my side of the room, you see that there are some framed things back here. Those are collages. Those are my first collages I ever made. And if you look closely, you can see there's a basketball player dunking on a basket, and this whole collage is about basketball. So I was taking Sports Illustrated, because we always got Sports Illustrated, and I was cutting up the images, and I was creating a gallery that I liked of images that I made that were meaningful to me. And so here, 40 years later, I'm doing the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Move it, turn a few lights on this screen so that if anybody has any questions, let me say hi to people on here. I have my phone. If anybody has any questions in the chat that they want to type out, and I can read aloud, but if anyone else in human form also has questions, we accept those as well.
So yeah, feel free, ask away if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer anything.
There's something going on there. It's projected.
Yep.
Oh, you're there. Thoughts, questions, fleeting contemplations of life and meaning. Questions?
I'm curious. I noticed on the 450 to 500 class when you were teaching that you did a science class, and for me, mathematics and science are very connected. I wonder if you have background, if you have background in science, how that might influence your photography.
Yeah, I mean, art is so reliant on science in terms of process and in terms of technique. You know, I had to figure out, can I paint on these photographs? If I do, will it destroy them? How will I get an image to stick if I use photo transfers? How's the brush going to interact on a really slick surface? It has no tooth to photograph. So do I use a projector? It's all technology. It's all science. It's light. It's form. And painting itself. Photography, painting, there's a lot of science in there. And so math too, right? So yeah, science is always a part of it. I tend to lead with my intellect, which can be scientific in its process, but it's always the other part of me that steps in and says, okay, no, we're gonna actually paint over that whole thing, or we're gonna cut that up because it's not working. So it's like a balance between the two, the scientific mind and the kind of the kid mind, you know, the part of us that knows when something's working and knows when it's not. It's something you can't teach. It's something you don't learn, I don't think. It's, we can strengthen our eye. We can strengthen our ability to determine what's working and what's not working, but we know when we're drawn to an image and when we're not. And I feel like without science, it's hard to make art. So it's a part of it, definitely. It's a good question. Veronica.
How you protect the photos? Because over the years, we're afraid.
That's a great question. That is a primary reason why I've moved away from photography. It really broke my heart. When I finished those two, Brianna and George, I did a lot of research scientifically. I called all these labs and companies that deal with framing and preserving. There's this 100-page book that was written by a scientist guy where he talks about what kind of photograph will last how long given different circumstances. And even if these were stored in the dark at a correct temperature, they will disintegrate within 70 years, possibly less, maybe 80 years. So I was like, holy cow, the last 15 years of my creative, these will be dead. The only way to preserve them is to take a photograph of them, then you have a digital file. But these are what's powerful. And so I moved towards painting and towards medias that have a lasting power because of these things aren't. With these bright windows, they're dying. But you guys got to see them, because without seeing them, you might as well not make them. It's almost like graffiti. You know, you paint it on the train and it's a masterpiece if it's a good artist, but it gets tagged up and there it's gone. So that's a hard part about working in photography. It's very, I don't like that part.
And in that case, if someone wants to purchase something like this, now we're after 7 years, 10 years.
Yeah, so there are a lot of reasons why photography has always had a backseat to painting and other forms of art, visual art. I think longevity is one of the reasons. Bless you. But in terms of purchase, I feel like there are a lot of people who buy art based on the investment. But I feel like there are other people who buy art because of what they want it to do for them in their life and what it gives to them. So some pieces of art don't last as long as other pieces of art, but the meaning of the art might be palatable to certain people. I know I did a public art project in Colorado, and they said to me, how long are these going to last? And at the time, I hadn't done as much research as I have done now. But one thing I told them was, I'm going to have these images, these photo collages taken with a high-res Hasselblad. I get all of these professionally photographed so that you could make a print that big. So it won't look as good as this, but you still have the image, and you can still make it big. But those are great questions.
Are all of those prints analog or import prints?
Are they?
Analog prints, like from a like supermarket.
Yeah, so these are, yeah, they're chromogenic prints. This series was done with a digital camera and my phone, but the images then get printed by, there's a printer in the Midwest that I use. I'm drawing a blank, but they use a chromogenic process. So these are with chemicals, made the traditional way.
Is there a reason you chose that? That's not part of the digital, so why did you choose to go that way?
This company does great work. They're very respected for their work. And I used to use a lab in Northampton where I live, and they went out of business. And so I found them, and I can upload the images. They're quick, and they do top quality work. So I was like, okay.
It's like a big puzzle. How long it takes for you to put all the images together and decide this is what I want, or how many times you have to know I would like to put this, you know, and maneuver all the pieces until you get the final art.
It's varies widely. You know, like that ICU picture I showed you took me 2 years to finish that. I would pull it out, I would make some changes, I would not know where to go with it, I'd put it back away. Some of these pieces are quick. You know, they come together within 2 weeks. You know, I think this piece was probably pretty quick. This Exodus piece of the ocean. Some pieces I understand easier. They're easier for me to put together. Whereas the piece that has the whale was, there's no horizon line. I couldn't, okay, this is going to be ocean, so I want the splash here, not here. This is where it meets the rocks. This was easier compositionally. Whereas some of these other pieces, they're much more challenging. The portal was very hard. That has paint all on the bottom. I end up sometimes, because I don't know the composition when I'm photographing, I end up not having photographs for what I need. And so if you look at that image, you'll see how much paint is on the bottom part in the grass and the broken tiles from the roof. I needed to make it work, but I didn't have the, yeah, same with the wall. There's even pictures from Cuba in the wall there, because I just needed some kind of image that would tone-wise fit into that wall. So anywhere from 2 months to 2 years. Some are even quicker, like that guy on the back wall. He probably took me a week. Now, again, so much of that is white, off-white space. There's not, it's just his figure. that's a simple, pretty simple image to put together. And then the painting is separate. You know, the painting is, it could go quick, it could go, luckily I didn't have to paint something and then cover it up because you got paint on there. What are you gonna do? It's not like a painting where you just paint over the whole thing. So, you know, some of the paintings were pretty quick. You know, maybe this only probably took an hour or two, you know?
Last questions, thoughts? Anyone on Zoom land? Well,
I want to say something very quick. Well, what I love about every image in this room is that they are reels of not a one-time experience. It's a lifetime experience. So usually when you take a picture, you capture the message in that moment. You know, but when you do it like this, it's more. I love when you sharing your story and the experience because it's not one moment. You know, it's how much it took, how many people were there, and I love this.
Thank you. That's very astute of you, that observation of a photograph is a moment, right? So it's a split second, a 1/100th, 1/1000th of a second. That's why the camera doesn't see the way we see. Because we see with the component of time. And so Hockney wrote quite a bit about how when he started doing these collages, he was able to introduce the element of time. And he talked about how when you look at a Rembrandt painting, Rembrandt sat at his easel for weeks and weeks, looking at himself in the mirror and painting. So when you look at the painting, you see all of that life, all of that energy, all of that struggle, all of that joy when he's done. It's all in there. And so this is a way of taking a medium that is so finite and injecting, expanding it, changing it. You know, I move when I'm photographing, so it changes the angle, which is kind of how we see. As we move, someone looks a little different, the angle moves. So you're exactly right, that this is what collage enables us to do with this time-based limited medium. Virgiline.
So, I would say that art, photo collage, painting has changed your life since you were 12 to now.
I mean, art for me is almost like, if you could do anything, what would you do? And for me, it's make art. And I remember as a kid, there's the kid in me that allows me to imagine what would my life look like if this is what I do. You know, having this show for me is, for my 12-year-old, complete dream come true. Like to stand in a room as beautiful as this with a beautiful group of people and have my work on the walls, that's what he would dream about. And so for me, it's the realization of a vision that was imaginary. And I'm so blessed and thankful that I get to live it. And so there's a permission there, almost from the universe, where the cosmos and God is like, this is a seed that I planted in you. If you honor it, I will honor you in that way. And I feel like it gives me and all of us permission to, because I know all of us here have these dreams and visions for ourselves and the things that we want to create. And so for me, art is that place where I say to the universe, to the cosmos, okay, I'm meeting you halfway. Help me out. Pat.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I find the images so compelling, the faces. And what I love as a member of the audience watching is that I'm pulled in to their gaze. I want to reach her hair. I could almost feel through that window, that portal. I could just, reach into it. And it makes the communal feeling just extremely strong. It's very, very compelling movie.
It's interesting that you bring that up because the reason why I made the images like this with the portraits from 100 years ago or 40 years ago, people who lived either here or were going to New York. You know, these women, these two girls were on a ship bound for the US. And so my sister and I and Andrew were sitting in an Airbnb in Squipello. We had arrived and we unpacked our things and we sat on the veranda and we looked out at this view. We were 100, 200 yards from the ocean. And we're sitting there and we're eating some antipasta and we have some wine and some water. There's a olive grove and I'm realizing it's been 120 years that since my family left southern Italy because they were starving, right? Because they couldn't make a living, they couldn't survive in their homeland. Like so many people, they leave. And now we are returning to the same land, staying in this beautiful Airbnb because we chose to, and eating good food. And I'm thinking to myself, our ancestors, for them, this must be the realization of what they intended in many ways. And so I wanted to have this conversation about the other part is that when I would go to Sicily, I remember the first time I stepped foot on Italian soil and something in my body said, you are home. And so I wanted to talk about how many of us are displaced. We're not in the homeland where our ancestors are from, and yet we're making a home. And we're all in this same process of this journey in this portal. You know, going to Italy is like going to the other side. I know, like, go to Puerto Rico or go to our ancestral homes, our lands, where it's going to a different dimension almost. And so I wanted to bring the drama too. You know theater, so for me, bringing the human drama to the visual art is very important. Thank you.
Mark, I think the last question I'll just read off of Tom, first name only, asked, those last two portraits in the slideshow seem so distinct from everything else you shared tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about how you made those?
Yeah, so again, back to Veronica, this notion that these are going to, you know, die, I moved towards painting, and those images are collages. So, you know, the lessons that I learned in these pieces about how do you take different pieces, put them together and try to create a whole that is powerful is operating in those last two portraits. They're not using photographs as the raw materials, they're using basically color. Yeah, it's sort of, you know, the faces are made up of paper, just cut up colored paper. And so I needed to learn a lot about color, relationship between colors, relationship between values from black to white and all the gradations, the intensity of color, and I need to learn all that stuff, which I've learned. I have a lot more to learn, but painting has given me a greater understanding, and those pieces rely on that knowledge, because if you're bringing a lot of color into one rectangle, you really got to know what you're doing, otherwise it looks crazy. So, but they are related to these because they're about people who have been forgotten or who are invisible. You know, I deal with working class people. I deal with the people whose stories we don't really hear about. We don't, like my grandmother, like if you didn't know her, she doesn't exist to you. And that has always made me sad, because I remember growing up, you go to museums, you see the wealthy, the elite are on the walls. And I want to change that. I want to bring the people at the bottom to the top by sharing the true lived lives of all these people who are amazing to me and who paved the way. So that series that's coming out of me now is about bringing those stories to the fore.
You did a pretty darn good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.